those businesses, and they were calling for the health officials to give them a bit more evidence as to, why they need to close this down. We've heard since they've been reopened that they are the safe place, the household settings where was the battle, that they were fighting was kind of, and that's why the household ban was introduced to start off. So they've obviously been given a more information from the health officials as to the increase in COVID cases and clusters around the hospitality sectors. I think it was Professor Ian Young said last week around 50% of the outbreaks were now being identified in hospitality. So they've obviously got the backing behind that, and that's why they've had to make this really difficult decision today. Absolutely massive, massive blow for the hospitality sector, everyone involved. And you think the likes of, I suppose, the wet pubs that are only open about a month now, they've had brought in stock, brought in take, things like that. It's just an awful time for so many of these businesses and these livelihoods. And we've heard before that so many owners, coming onto our newsroom and saying, we simply won't survive another lockdown. We've heard from pub owners, restaurants, all the likes of that. So it will be interesting to see what kind of, or if a support package is going to be introduced here today, because I know they were saying that they just simply couldn't go into another lockdown or circuit breaker or whatever you like to call it if they weren't going to get that funding. So hopefully on the back of this, they will be announcing some kind of funding package to hopefully get people through the next 4 weeks.
Yeah, already this morning, one Belfast cafe has put out the following on Twitter, and you can see just the concern that the staff of Square Bistro actually in Lisburn have. They've just reopened on the 23rd of July. They've had 20 plus staff. Not one of them have had COVID-19. No customer has been traced back to them as a source of COVID-19. They're saying it's a total farce. From the executive, 48 hours notice is another joke. We stand to lose a fortune. Some businesses clearly won't recover. Some people will inevitably lose their jobs from the decision we're going to hear here in the next few minutes. We are planning to go across to the Assembly and hear what the First Minister has to say any second now. Is it your suspicion, Sasha, that this is going to be framed as the much anticipated circuit breaker? I think the First Minister, from the conversation she had with us on our live show last week, was keen to avoid this narrative of lockdown or total lockdown, and even this idea of a circuit breaker. How are they going to brand this? Is this going to be a just further restrictions? What do you think?
Yes, definitely. They were saying that it's not going to be the full lockdown in March, and I'm just hearing now that the Speaker is now in the Assembly, so we'll cross over live to Stormont now.
In response to the increased incidence of the transmission of COVID-19. Before we commence, may I thank members for their patience last night. Ordinarily, I would always seek to give members greater warning of an additional sitting, and I was therefore keen to keep whips up to date as much as I could throughout the evening. Members know that I have been focused in recent weeks on ensuring the role of the Assembly is respected and highlighting the expectation that ministers should bring important matters to this House. Given the seriousness of the situation which we are currently in, I want to welcome the fact that the First Minister and Deputy First Minister have chosen to bring an update on the latest executive decision to the Assembly at this earliest opportunity. These are exceptional times. We are dealing with serious and complex issues. No matter our individual views, I want to acknowledge that both the Executive and the Assembly have difficult choices and decisions to make in these worrying circumstances. I think we all need to recognise that. Therefore, it is right and proper that members have the first opportunity available to raise questions with ministers this morning on behalf of the communities that we represent. And finally, members, we all know that these sittings do not happen by themselves, so I want to personally express my gratitude to all of the staff who stayed on last evening at short notice, many of them until the midnight hour, and I appreciate their complete dedication to this Assembly. Members, I have received notice from the First Minister that she wishes to make a statement. Members should make sure that their name is on the speaking list if they wish to be called, but they can do this by rising in their places, as well as notifying the Business Office or Speaker's table directly. I have a number of names on the list to ask a question, and standing orders do not permit me to extend the time for questions after the statement beyond an hour. I therefore remind members to be concise in asking their questions. This is not an opportunity for debate per se, and long introductions will not be accepted. I just do want to stress the number of members who want to speak here. I want to enable every member in this House who wishes to ask a question and engage with the First Minister the opportunity to do so. That depends entirely on the cooperation of all the members, so please be concise. I will not allow people to have long introductory statements. Please get your questions, and then let all members have the opportunity to raise their relevant questions on behalf of their constituents. I call the First Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And before I make my statement, can I associate myself with your comments in relation to the staff and say that we deeply appreciate the work that they did late last night and early this morning in relation to the facilitation of the sitting here today. So I just wanted to make that comment. And, Mr. Speaker, we wish to provide members with an update on decisions that the Executive have taken in relation to essential actions needed to reduce COVID-19 transmission rates. There has been much coverage in the press about variations and restrictions, and it is with this in mind, along with the very worrying increase in numbers of cases and hospitalisations, that we have looked at the various levels of restrictions that we need now. We all have a role to break this chain, and it's important that we all understand this. People pass COVID onto each other, and that happens in a variety of settings. And limiting our social contacts will play a role in breaking the chain. We have already asked everyone to assist us with this by not gathering in domestic settings, and that has been taken forward in regulations. We also have local restrictions in Derry City and Strabane local government council area. But the numbers have continued to rise. The doubling rate is of grave concern, and hospitalisations are on the increase. This is deeply troubling, and more steps are now urgently needed. The Executive has discussed, and we have concluded, that we must put the following measures in place. First of all, maintenance of current household restrictions. This means a continuation of the restriction on meeting indoors and a limit on the number who can meet in a garden. There are existing exemptions for childcare and maintenance and other matters which will stay in place. However, as close contact economy is proposed for closure, it would be consistent with that to prohibit the provision of those services, for example hairdressing, in a domestic setting. Bubbling is to be limited to a maximum of 10 people from 2 households. No overnight stays in a private home unless in a bubble. Work from home unless unable to do so. In guidance, we will advise universities and further education to deliver distance learning to the maximum extent possible, with only essential face-to-face learning where that is a necessary and unavoidable part of the course. Closure of the hospitality sector, apart from deliveries and takeaway for food, with the existing closing time of 11 o'clock remaining. Other takeaway premises will be then brought into line with hospitality, with a closing time of 11 p.m. Retail will stay open. However, there will be urgent engagement with the sector to ensure that retail is doing everything it can to help suppress the virus. Closure of close contact services, apart from those meeting essential health needs, which will be defined in the regulations to ensure continuation of essential health interventions and therapeutics. This will not include complementary treatments. No indoor sport of any kind or organised contact sport involving household mixing other than at elite level. No mass events involving more than 15 people, except for allowed outdoor sporting events where the relevant number for that will continue to apply. Gyms may remain open, but for individual training only, with local enforcement in place. Places of worship are to remain open, with a mandatory requirement to wear face coverings when entering and exiting, and this will not apply to parties to a marriage or civil partnership. Wedding ceremonies and civil partnerships to be limited to 25 people, with no receptions. This will be implemented on Monday, the 19th of October. Venues providing the post-ceremony or partnership celebration may remain open for this purpose this weekend, but may not provide other services for people who are not part of the wedding or partnership, and this will be limited to 25. Funerals and committals to be limited to 25 people, with no pre- or post-funeral gathering. In guidance, no unnecessary travel will be advised. Off-licences and supermarkets will not be permitted to sell alcohol after 8 p.m, and we believe the above restrictions should apply for 4 weeks, and the continuation or amendment of any element would require executive approval. In education, the half-term holiday break will be extended from the 19th to the 30th of October, with schools reopening again on Monday the 2nd of November. To permit this, the Department of Education will allocate to schools 2 of the optional days and the remainder of additional time through exceptional closure days. As across other jurisdictions, the issue of schools, along with other considerations, will be kept under continuous review by the Executive in the weeks and months ahead. Now, we fully appreciate that this will be a difficult and worrying news for a lot of people. The Executive has taken this decision because it is necessary, and we discussed the impacts in great detail, and we do not take this step lightly. We want these measures to have 2 impacts. Firstly, on the COVID transmission rates, which must be turned down now, or we will be in a very difficult place very soon indeed. And secondly, we believe it marks a point where everyone, each and every one of us, can take stock and go back to the social distancing messaging that is vitally important. We will, of course, be engaging with sectors and working on supports as a matter of priority. We are asking all children and young people and their parents to help us in a very particular way during the next few weeks. Please make sure that your children and young people follow the social distancing arrangements during this time, limit socialising as much as possible, and use the time in as positive a way as you can. We will need to exit these arrangements most carefully. They will be put in place during Friday of this week and will be there for 4 weeks. Any extension or amendment to them will require a decision of the Executive. We must reach a different place on both the numbers and on getting back to the basics of social distancing, and I know that everyone in this chamber will want to work with us on that. Mr. Speaker, small acts can have a large and important contribution to managing COVID-19. So wash your hands, practice social distancing, wear face coverings. Small acts, but vitally important. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and I call Colin McGrath, Chairperson for the Committee for the Executive Office.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the First Minister for her statement this morning. Judging by the hundreds of messages that I received overnight, people across the north went to bed last night not knowing if their children would be going to school today, if businesses would be opening, or if they needed to go to work. And the confusion over the past 24 hours has certainly not helped that. We need to approach this pandemic together as equal partners and do the heavy lifting within our communities together. So let this be the moment, the clean break, where we provide people with the clarity, with the answers and the support and the direction that they need. This statement is welcome, but what is missing is the specific financial detail desperately needed by businesses and workers. We know that one furlough scheme is about to end and another one due to commence soon, but in light of this statement today, can I ask the First Minister what specific and tailored help will there now be to prevent people making the impossible choice between their family's health and their family finances?
I thank the Chairman for his intervention. And I mean, there was never going to be a situation where we were going to announce overnight that people had to do something the next day. I mean, that was never going to happen, which is why these restrictions will come into force on Friday to give people time to plan. In terms of the schools were planning to take a week off for Halloween break, most of them. Some were taking 4 days, some were taking 6 days, but in the main, around a week. The Education Minister has proposed a way forward to minimise the loss of learning for our young people. I think that's hugely important. Others would have wanted to have closed the schools for a longer period of time. Fundamentally, the education of our young people is a right, and absolutely their life chances need to be protected. So I am content that the Education Minister, in terms of what he has proposed, has thought very long and hard about how he can help to reduce the COVID incidents, but also protect those young people. Yesterday, the Leader of the SDLP told the Executive to get on with putting these restrictions in place. We had a very long, a very thoughtful executive meeting last night. Very difficult decisions were taken, Mr. Speaker. I don't shy away from that. I don't shy away from the fact that a lot of these decisions will make a huge impact on people's lives. But they are for 4 weeks. We're very determined that this will be a time-limited intervention. They will not continue past those 4 weeks. The Executive will have to revisit this again at that time. And it is important to say that we will be putting supports in place. We put the discussion last night was around what interventions we needed to take. Tomorrow, the Executive will discuss the support systems that are being in place, and I hope we'll be able to sign off on those support systems, because the member is right in this. We need to support our businesses, our employees, as they go through this most difficult of time. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, that member after member, when they get up today, won't be trying to make trite political points, because this is not the time for trite political points. This is the time for trying to find solutions for every one of our citizens as we face into this terrible situation together. And I hope that we will have that cooperation right across the House today.
Thank you. And I call Keith Buchanan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the First Minister for her statement so far. First Minister, with regard to education and young people's welfare, what evidence did the Executive balance up to come to this decision of the additional week, or approximately an additional week of closure, and the impact that would have on them? So just interested to know what evidence you've weighed up.
Well, as I've indicated, the Education Minister was very clear that we did not want to inflict any more damage to our young people. We realise that they have been off school for a considerable length of time due to the lockdown in March, and we had to look at the impact that this would have on peer socialisation, the whole culture of going to school and having that school experience. Of course, the loss of learning time is very critical as well. Young people need to be able to take those exams at the end of the year so that their life chances are there for them. We did have to obviously consider the impact on vulnerable children, children with special educational needs, to make sure that they were covered as well, which is why we are only taking the route of the Halloween break as was, plus a number of extra days. I think it is right that we minimise this as much as we possibly can for our young people, recognising that at the same time we're trying to get the COVID transmission rate under control. That is why the break is starting now, so that we can have that maximum impact starting now. And I hope that we will be able to see that. But this is a 2-week break. Children will return to school on the 2nd of November, and I think that's hugely important that I say that today.
I call Colin Gildernew.
Gora mai agad cean comhairle agus buaithlam buíochas a gol leis an ggó céad ára as a righteous seo. I'd like to thank the First Minister for coming to make this statement today. While it is beyond doubt that these measures are now absolutely necessary and indeed urgent, it's also the case that they will, as you have mentioned, Joint First Minister, have implications and knock-on impacts. The system in place to test and trace has struggled to cope. So will the Executive use this opportunity and this time to reboot and to put in place an effective find, test, trace, isolate and support system, so that every element of that system is working, so that to ensure we do not find ourselves back in this place again?
Well, I think the member raises an important point about the capacity of our health service, and I think that is one that we will have to revisit over the next number of weeks. Obviously, the health service and the test, trace and protect system is fundamentally, at first point, a matter for the Health Minister, and I'm sure he will be making his own commentary today in relation to all of these matters. But it is very important that we have a health service which we know was under pressure before we came back in January, but we need to have a health service that is scaled up in the coming days, that is fit for purpose, one that has the capacity, one that is reforming, although I accept it's very difficult to reform when we're in this crisis situation. But if we need to have mutual aid and if we need to have assistance from the rest of the United Kingdom, then we shouldn't stop ourselves from asking for that help and assistance. At present, we are managing the ICU beds, we are managing the hospital capacity, but we do need to take these interventions to make sure that we can continue to deal with the ICU capacity and all of the other problems. In terms of test, trace, protect and isolate, there are different elements of that, and he's right to mention that, and it was good to hear from the Communities Minister last night that actually we were ahead of the game in terms of supporting people who had to isolate with our discretionary payment system. And again, when we look at the various ranges of supports that we will have in place tomorrow, we will be saying more about those issues. But we felt it was important that we came to the House today to outline the issues in terms of the restrictions, but we will have much more to say tomorrow about the supports that will be in place to try and assist people, whether they have to self-isolate or whether there are people whose businesses have to close across those 4 weeks to try and help us get this COVID virus under control.
Thank you. And I call Steve Egan.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Speaker, and thank you very much indeed for the First Minister for making this statement to us today. And I would like, on behalf of the Ulster Unionist Party, to pass on our thanks to the Northern Ireland Executive and all the parties within the Northern Ireland Executive for coming to these particular difficult decisions in the time that we had to make them in these challenging circumstances, particularly on the impact on our health service. But the question I would like to ask the First Minister, bearing in mind the importance of what we need to do to make societal changes, what are we doing to ensure that our Executive and the parties that are supporting our Executive are there to make sure that we communicate effectively, we deal with these issues, and we all collectively work together to ensure that this message goes out to the people of Northern Ireland that we have to make these changes because we do not have the time. Our health service does not have the time. We have to make these changes.
I thank the member for his commentary, and I'm sure executive colleagues will thank him for his position in relation to our decision last night. Look, the Health Minister has been very clear with us in relation to the capacity of the health service, that if we hadn't taken interventions last night, and which I'm communicating to you today, that our health service would not have been able to deal with what was coming down the line, and that was very concerning for all of us. These are very difficult decisions because, as all of us know, we are being asked about elective surgery, we're being asked about cancer care, we're being asked about all of those things. But I think what people need to understand is, because we're having to spend so much time dealing with the rise in COVID, we then have to turn off elective surgery and all of those things. So the two things are intertwined in that way. And if we don't take action personally, all of us personally, then the rise of COVID will stop all of those other things from happening. And sometimes I listen to people and they say, we're not doing enough in terms of surgery, we're not doing enough in terms of heart disease and all of those other things. And that's because of the rise of COVID and because people aren't taking personal responsibility for their own behaviour. So if we get anything out of today, Mr Speaker, and it is about us all having a message that people need to take personal responsibility for their actions, then I think that will be a very positive thing coming out of the Assembly today. Because what we all want to do, I hope, is to protect the health service, minimise the number of deaths that occur, and also protect our economy and the well-being of society here in Northern Ireland. It is about that balance. I've talked about it all week, trying to take proportionate action, trying to take a balanced way forward, and that's what we were trying to do last evening.
Thank you. And I call Stuart Dixon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, First Minister, for your statement. And I have to agree with you. You will not find the Alliance Party disagreeing with you when you say that the public health message must be the first message and our first priority. However, there are businesses out there across Northern Ireland who will be hurting today. There will be businesses making very difficult decisions, not just about the support that this executive is going to give them, but whether there is a future for their business. Can you assure businesses across Northern Ireland that urgent action will be taken to set out clear support for them?
I thank the member for his question. Absolutely. As the member knows, the Chancellor announced new supports which will kick in on the 1st of November. It is not as generous as the furlough scheme that was in place with the lockdown back in March. Of course, we are not in a lockdown situation now. We are putting in interventions for a limited period of time. But that doesn't take away the fact that a lot of businesses will be suffering. They will be worried. And I've talked about this many times, that we get bad health outcomes if people are unemployed, if they're in poverty, if they are in a situation where they can see no way out. And we have to give them that hope and that determination that there will be better days, but there will be better days if people take personal responsibility for their actions, Mr. Speaker. And I know people think it doesn't apply to me because I'm fine, and if I get it, and that's it. But the point is, they are impacting upon our hospitals, they're impacting upon our economy, they're impacting upon the whole way of life here in Northern Ireland. So I plead with people today, please take personal responsibility for your actions. Please work with us so that we can, as we did in March and April, get this virus under control. People looked at this part of the world and said, Northern Ireland's doing very well. I want to get back to that place again, but I can only do it if people work with us all. And I hope that people who are affected by the decisions today, and I know there are many people affected by our decisions today, will want to see what we have to say tomorrow in relation to specific supports, and I very much hope that we can sign off on those tomorrow at the Executive.
I'm going to call Paula Bradley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the First Minister so far for her answers? First Minister, I want to go back to the issue of education again. Just can you share with us any of the evidence that you were shown, or the Executive were shown around the risk, and are there any other ways of mitigating that risk? I know, again, as an MLA, I have received emails from headmasters and headmistresses from various schools wanting to know why they're having to have this extra week. And also, you'd also mentioned there about SEN, and I just want to ask, how seriously was the balance taken with special educational needs?